Hey you, welcome back to Let's Play Kerbal Space Program. This is episode 29. My name is Sachmo. Thank you so much for being here. I almost gave my real name. Just a minute ago you saw me digging around in the R&D. That was to grab the a special part that I can't remember the name of right now, but you'll see me put it on in a minute. It's a part that generates electricity constantly for you, and which is a very handy part. I think it's kind of a near future technology type part that they've included in the game. Yeah, it just works. It just generates electricity, so it's essentially infinite electricity, which is very handy. It generates a relatively small amount of electricity, but it does generate electricity. So why? Well, I guess there's kind of an obvious reason to do that, because there it is right there. Those pieces right there. I'm putting those on the inside in that little cabin there. So yeah, there's kind of an obvious reason to put them on there. Well, it's free electricity, right? But there's another reason I'm putting them on, and that's because today we're going to Eeloo. Now, you probably clicked on this video after seeing the title, so I'm sure you already knew that, but I would be remiss if I didn't say it anyway. Now, the point of those electric batteries, I just can't think of the name of them. Maybe I'll put them on the screen, but you saw those. The point of those, the reason we need those is what I should say, is because when you're that far away from the sun, your solar panels, they don't work so good. So you need something else, some other way to generate electricity. And there's a couple different ways to do it. There's a fuel cell battery pack type thing, which converts fuel into electricity. And those are pretty handy too. But of course, that just means that you have to bring more fuel. And then these, which generate a small amount of electricity constantly. And that's what we're going to do. So what we're doing here is I'm going to put 4 nuclear engines on there, and the thing is, I want to use the Mark III command pod. So I'm using those big tanks in the middle, those kind of medium-sized tanks in the middle, and then just radially attaching the smaller liquid fuel tanks with the atomic engines on the side there, and just attaching them directly to the side, which is not something I normally do. But it's kind of a trick that I got. Not a trick, but it's something that I got from MacLeod. And in fact, you'll see a lot of this spaceship design here is borrowed from MacLeod's spaceship design whenever he went to Eeloo. And so yeah, I was definitely inspired by that. I have no shame in admitting it works really, really well. So I figured I would go ahead and give it a shot myself. Anyway, just including the whole thing there in a fairing. And though we are watching the design process, it's going by relatively quickly. So as we go through the video, I'll go in a little bit more detail about it. But there's probably nothing in there that we haven't seen already. So a nice, pretty standard launch here. Everything up top is in a fairing. We have the 2 side boosters, a couple feeding fuel into the center booster, and kind of an asparagus staging type thing. And just using a gravity assist here. You see I'm just following that prograde marker all the way down. And we wound up having a very beautiful launch here. I'm very, very happy with this launch. Something about this launch I want to make mention of is that I wound up going up to 120 kilometers. Now, I like to go up to like 75 or 80. I like to go pretty much as low into orbit as possible. Or I like to go to 100 because it's just such a pretty number. But in this case, I'm going up to 120. And there's a very good reason for that. In fact, you'll see that reason here momentarily. First, I'll circularize. And then I'll select Eeloo. And what we have here is that the planet Kerbal and Eeloo are 101 degrees out of phase with each other. And that's when you want to launch to get an intercept. So what I've done here is I've done my first maneuver node that will get me out to the distance that Eeloo is, and then I have a second maneuver node there at the ascending node, and I'm adjusting that to do the inclination. And so if you didn't know, you can do both of these adjustments at the same time. You can set up multiple maneuver nodes, and you can see the final product of all these maneuvers. And that's a very handy way to do things. Anyway, right here is the moment I want to point out. You see that I'm actually burning into the planet a little bit. If you look at that nav ball, what that's doing is that's reducing my periapsis just momentarily as we come around the planet. So it is decreasing my periapsis, but ultimately, here in a minute, I'll be going so fast that I will just will leave Kerbal and indeed leave Kerbin's SOI. The point is that during the course of this burn, because it's such a long burn, it is very much possible to decrease your periapsis to the point where you will just re-enter Kerbin's atmosphere. And then, you'll be flying through the atmosphere again, which, you don't want to be fighting that for Delta V reasons. But of course, you can also just re-enter, or you can cause your craft to overheat, or a number of problems. Pretty much all the reasons that you're in space flying around, those reasons all go away whenever you cease to be in space and you still try to do orbital maneuvers. So anyway, you have to go high enough to where those type of burns don't re-enter you back into the atmosphere. At any rate, I've completed that burn, and so now I am just taking that second maneuver node and making fine adjustments to get close to the planet Eeloo. Up to this point, maybe except for that inclination change, everything is pretty much the same as we've done during the Duna mission. In fact, even the inclination change is the same. It's just that this is a much more extreme version of it. Eeloo is at a pretty highly inclined orbit with relation to Kerbin. It's also pretty eccentric too, for that matter. But that wasn't the important part. So here we are. I'm just following that node down that line, and I pass it up a little bit here, and then I have to make a couple quick adjustments to try to bring it up. But unfortunately, this planet is so small and it's so far out there that even the smallest little bit of change makes a huge difference down the line. So here I am, had to reduce the thrust of all of those engines. Now, those atomic engines, this is a good point to mention. They are incredibly efficient. They are very, very, very efficient. They do not use oxidizer, by the way. So if you saw those big Rockamax tanks that I have in there, I had to take out all the oxidizer because they won't get used, and therefore it's just dead weight. At any rate, it runs purely on liquid fuel. It does have an alternator, which is fantastic. Some engines do not, but these actually do provide electric charge. More on that later. And they are extremely efficient, but they have a very, very, very low thrust. That's why I have 4 of them burning at once on this craft, because as you see, the burn time, for instance, right here, we're looking at 10 minutes, over 10 minutes here to burn. It is 10 real-time minutes. So I am pressing Alt period and Alt comma to physics warp through these, so it doesn't take me in real life so long. But even then, it was plenty enough time for me to make a salad and use the restroom and all the other things that I had to do in real life during these maneuvers, because it still does take a significant amount of time for you to actually perform these things. So, however, what you lose in time, you do gain in efficiency. At any rate, I had enough of that maneuver node, so here I just switched over to burning retrograde, since that's essentially the crux of the maneuver anyways, to go retrograde. And I don't really know what I was looking for there, but I was just looking at the planet and the orbital information. Anyway, now I'm going to circularize around the planet. I really don't care where I am in terms of height. I'm at 14 kilometers, and that's good enough for me. But I do want to circularize. There's a quick edit there while I went to go play pool with my brother. Like I say, I've been kind of recording this video all day, and it's just taken me a while to actually get out. So there's a several-hour break there, but at any rate, here we are, and we are in a circular orbit. I'm just doing a little bit of a radial burn. And here's kind of an interesting thing that happens. This top part, which is the lander, I decoupled from the bottom part, but then it wouldn't go anywhere, which was frustrating to say the least. You see I'm using my engine there, and I couldn't find why the two craft wouldn't separate. And so I just kind of wiggled the thing back and forth. I lowered the landing gear, and eventually I thrusted to the point where it actually blew up one of the engines. So I reverted the quick save and tried again. Here I am trying to spin the thing, trying to loosen it up. And at this point, I'm actually pretty frustrated because I'm thinking that, you see what happens. I'm thinking that I accidentally merged 2 items together in the editor. And if that's the case, then I have to go back to the beginning and redo this entire video over again. However, once I time warped, the 2 craft just kind of became unstuck and floated away from each other. So I really don't know what happened there. But one way or the other, the 2 craft were merged, and I don't know how. Here I'm leaving in the part where I forgot that I got a bunch of science. Then I realized that I couldn't reset the science because all I have in this crew pod with me is Jeb. And since I want the science not only from space but also from the planet, I went ahead and reverted to the last quick save so that way I can get the science on the planet, then bring it back up, and then I have Bill on board who can reset the science experiments and then get it from space too. So I made a little bit of a mistake there, and running those science experiments early, so that's why I had to a little quick save there. Again, no shame in that. And here we're doing kind of our typical D-orbit, just burning kind of against the horizon and then coming up onto that node and quickly, gently, there we go, just gently touching down. Beautiful. So this is a big icy planet way out in the middle of nowhere. It's approximately the size of a moon. I think it has the same mass as the moon, so it's kind of similar gravity. And not a whole lot to say, except for, once you're out here, it's essentially like being on the moon. It's really nice and flat, which is great because it makes it easier to land on. Before I say anything else, here I am going to time warp until the docking ship is kind of above my ship. I waited a little bit too long here, but that's okay. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to try to fly in a direction where our orbits are lined up. So here I am kind of moving that nav ball around until I see that, there we go, our orbits are similar. Just kind of doing that by eye. If you can figure out ahead of time, if you can do the math or think about it in your head where those two things will be ahead of time, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I just kind of flipped around until I saw that it was, until that they were going to match up. And I wound up just on that one burn without circularizing or anything, I wound up getting a nice close approach. So the only thing to that is that because I wasn't able to circularize, I am kind of low to the ground. So you'll see me flip back and forth from map view to craft view just to make sure that I wasn't going to collide with any kind of mountain or anything. But like I was saying a minute ago, Eeloo is pretty flat, so there aren't really many terrain concerns to consider. So here at our closest point, I do the typical docking thing. I reduce our relative velocity, and I point at the target and fire the engines. A little sip of the gin and tonic. I spent all day recording this video, and while I do not drink and fly spacecraft, I don't mind having a little bit of sip while I'm recording the voiceover. Hope you don't mind. Anyway, I do not have a pilot on this craft, nor do I have a some kind of probe core or anything like that. So I did have to kind of manually point the two craft at each other. Otherwise, you can do what I typically do and just hold the two markers. Now here, I have the same problem that I had, except in reverse, where I literally had to thrust and kind of wiggle that ship around. You see, it's so funny looking. Just kind of wiggled it in between there, but sure enough, it did work. And the only reason I did that was to transfer the little bit of fuel that I had remaining back into our transfer stage. Anyway, I get one of the green men out, and I fly around and reset all the science, and then I hop back in and do all of the science. And then I hop back out, and then I collect all of the science. Because the module there, what do you call that? The payload, what do you call that thing? Whatever, this box here that I have all the experiments in. For some reason, I'm drawing a blank. I will not be returning that back home, so I had to go inside the experimental storage unit. There we go, and grab all of that off with a Kerbal, rather, and bring it back inside manually. At any rate, doing a prograde burn here, and I was rotating it around to see when I was going to get down to the same atmosphere or the same altitude as Kerbal. Here I make a little bit of a mistake. For some reason, I'm thinking that I was going in a clockwise orbit. So I did my burn at the ascending node, which I thought was going to be the next inclination node. And you see that I get kind of a close approach, but really all I'm worried about here is getting my altitude down to the altitude of Kerbal, and getting our planes aligned. Now something else to consider here is that I forgot those little battery recharge units. I put all of them on the lander, and I forgot to put any of them on the interstage. I don't know why I did that. I completely forgot to put them on both. I meant to do it on both, but I didn't. So you see I have 150 electric charge here. I'm going to have to be very careful to only use 150 electric charge. Of course, I do have these engines that will replenish my electric charge, but anyway, if you see, that's why the resource manager is up there in the top right hand corner, so I can kind of keep an eye on my electric charge the entire time. And if I ever need any more, I can just kind of fire those engines a little bit to use the alternator to give me some more. Anyway, here I am changing. I realize now that I'm going the other direction, so I did the same maneuver but on the other side. It actually wound up saving me about 200 meters a second at delta V, so All right. At any rate, here we are at the descending node now, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm just doing that inclination change. I'm looking at the flight engineer here to see that our inclinations are matched or within at least a reasonable tolerance. And then I'm going to fly over here to periapse, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to reduce my periapsis, or my apoapsis in this case, I'm sorry, and see if I get a moment when we have a close approach. Now, unfortunately, and I think there's a mod that does this, but unfortunately, if you're rendezvousing two vehicles, then you'll always have these close approach markers up there, even if the approach is on the other side of the orbit. Like if you're a full orbit, or I should say half an orbit away from each other, it'll still show you that that's the closest that your two craft will be. When you're rendezvousing with a planet here, when you're intercepting a planet, it only shows you one close approach per orbit. So it waits until the planet goes around an entire orbit to recalculate that, essentially. So what you have to do in this case is where I just click the next orbit button on the little flight planner, so that it would do that calculation and see when those two things were when the two craft were actually going to come in contact with each other. Now, I think there's a mod or a setting or something like that you can use that will do what I'm suggesting, which is as you change your orbit with respect to the planet, it'll still show you an updated version of how close you will be at all times. If you remember back to my rescue video, which was, when was that? Oh, that was the last video. If you remember back to last video, when I had to rendezvous the two craft together, this is a similar problem that I had, where once you get to the part where your craft and the planet are at their closest point together, then the closest point marker will travel with the two of you until you get to the point where you have a next closest point. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think if you play the game, you'll understand what I'm talking about. At any rate, I think there's a way to change that to where you can have a kind of real-time updated version of that. At any rate, I managed to set it to change to predict where the next orbit was. You saw me there. I just flew around one extra orbit until I got this node, and sure enough, I come right up to the very end of this burn, and there it is. I got my intercept. So now I go all the way to the other side, make a maneuver node at my apoapsis, and I wasn't happy with it, so I changed to kind of where it was, and here I was able to set up a node that's actually going to bring me home. Now right here, just briefly, it's there. You saw I had a very polar orbit. That would not be ideal. The more inclined you are, well, I should say this: the greater the inclination difference between your orbit around the craft's orbit around the planet and the planet around the sun, the faster your relative velocity will be. So if I were to come in at kind of a polar orbit like that, I would be flying very, very, very quickly with respect to Kerbin, which is going to cause re-entry problems. Whereas if, like I have here, I have a nice kind of equatorial intercept going, and that's going to be the slowest. That's going to be essentially the safest. So here I made sure that I had a nice equatorial orbit. And now that I just entered the SOI, I'm just doing a little bit of a retrograde burn to slow myself down and flip over to periapsis. And yes, even though the footage is sped up, it really was that quick. I warped down to periapsis and pressed M, and then I was already burning up in the atmosphere. At any rate, I burned off what little fuel that I had, and then tried to separate these two craft, but again, it's kind of wedged in there. If I had to do this again, I wouldn't put those extra tanks at the top that kind of cage in the top of the craft, or I would put some kind of separatron type thing or something, I don't know. But those caused me problems twice in this playthrough, so I wouldn't be doing that again. At any rate, when it's all said and done, it was a pretty easy mission to do. You see I'm there and back again. Relatively simple. It's a planet. It's the furthest planet at times. It's the furthest planet away from the sun. It's the smallest planet, if I'm not mistaken, and it's kind of the hardest to land on in terms of delta V. But there we are. I got over 3,000 science from that. And then here I am just kind of checking out the R&D to see what we have left. We almost have enough science to fill out the tree. But we'll probably have to do one more mission before we can fully fill out the tree. So, at any rate, thank you guys for joining me. A relatively short episode. I wanted to just kind of speed through and show you that process. I don't really think there's anything in there brand new, but it is another planet that we can kind of check off our list, isn't it? We did use the nuclear engines for the first time. You got to see those. And I will probably be using this kind of a very similar spacecraft design in future videos as well, because it works so well. So at any rate, thank you guys so much for being here. I really hope you appreciate the content. If you have any questions about that mission or any other, about the game or general, or if you want to talk about me or you want to talk about you, leave it in the comments below, and I'll respond to every comment, I promise. And other than that, I really appreciate you guys being here. Like and subscribe if you feel so inclined. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thanks again.